They say you never forget the moment your life changes forever. For me, it was 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday, sitting in Richard Morrison's corner office, watching him lean back in his leather chair with that smug smile I'd grown to despise over the past 6 months. "Brittany," he said, his fingers drumming against his mahogany desk, "we need to talk about your presentation." I had just finished delivering the quarterly report that would save Morrison Tech over $2 million in operational costs. 12 years of climbing the corporate ladder, of being the first one in the office and the last one to leave, of sacrificing weekends and holidays for this company. And he wanted to talk about my presentation? "I thought the cost-saving analysis was quite comprehensive, Richard," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. He laughed, actually laughed, and gestured toward the woman standing by his window. Tiffany Summers, 26 years old, blonde, size 0, and according to office gossip, Richard's not-so-secret affair partner for the past 3 months. "That's exactly the problem, Brittany. This company is evolving. We're moving into new markets, courting high-profile investors. We need executives who can, how do I put this delicately, represent our brand appropriately." The room fell silent except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. I knew where this was going, but I needed to hear him say it. "What exactly are you trying to tell me, Richard?" Before I tell you exactly how his discrimination became the foundation for the most satisfying corporate takedown in Morrison Tech's history, could you hit that like button and subscribe? Because what I'm about to share will show you how one man's shallow prejudice triggered a chain reaction worth $50 million in lost revenue. Trust me, you'll want to hear every detail of how his perfect replacement became his perfect nightmare. Tiffany stepped forward, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "What Richard is trying to say," she began, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "is that you're just not executive material anymore. The board wants someone who can command a room, someone who looks the part." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. "Someone who looks the part?" Richard cleared his throat. "Brittany, you're a brilliant analyst. Nobody's questioning your technical skills. But let's be honest, you've let yourself go over the years. The executive team needs to project success, vitality, confidence. When potential investors see our leadership team, you're firing me because I'm fat." The words came out flat, emotionless. "We're restructuring your position," Tiffany interjected smoothly. "I'll be taking over as vice president of operations. You'll be transferred to a consulting role in the back office. Same salary, of course." Same salary. As if money could compensate for the humiliation of being demoted because I wore a size 16 instead of a size 2. Richard leaned forward, trying to look paternal. "Brittany, this is what's best for everyone. You'll have less stress, fewer client meetings, more time to focus on what you do best, the analytical work. And who knows, maybe you'll use this opportunity to work on yourself, get back in shape." I sat there for a moment, processing the surreal nature of what was happening. 12 years of loyalty, of being the one they called when deals were falling apart, of single-handedly increasing departmental efficiency by 37%. And they were replacing me with a woman whose biggest accomplishment was being Richard's gym buddy, in more ways than one. "I see," I said finally, standing up and smoothing my skirt. "And when does this restructuring take effect?" "Immediately," Tiffany said, barely containing her excitement. "I've already had my belongings moved into your office. Well, my office now." The knife twisted a little deeper. They hadn't just planned this. They'd orchestrated it down to the smallest detail. How long had they been discussing my weight behind closed doors? How many meetings had they held? Dissecting my appearance like I was some kind of corporate liability. "I'll need some time to transition my projects," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "Actually," Richard interrupted, "Tiffany has been shadowing your work for the past month. She's fully up to speed on all your initiatives." Shadowing my work. For a month. While I'd been burying myself in spreadsheets and client calls, they'd been planning my professional execution. As I walked toward the door, Richard called out one last humiliation. "Brittany, this really is for the best. Maybe now you can focus on your health, join a gym, find a nice man. Life is about more than work, you know." I turned back to face him, and for just a moment, I let him see the fire in my eyes. You're absolutely right, Richard. Life is about so much more than work. The elevator ride down to the 15th floor felt like the longest 30 seconds of my life. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my keycard, still processing the fact that my corner office, the one I'd earned through years of 60-hour weeks, was now occupied by a woman who thought synergy was a type of energy drink. My new office was a glorified closet with no windows and a desk that looked like it had been salvaged from a 1990s government auction. The nameplate on the door read, B. Williams, Senior Analyst, a title I'd outgrown 8 years ago. I closed the door and sat down, staring at the blank walls that would now define my professional existence. That's when my phone buzzed. Brittany Williams speaking. Ms. Williams, this is Margaret Chen from Chen & Associates. We represent the Morrison Family Trust. I froze. The Morrison Family Trust, as in Harold Morrison, Richard's father and the founder of Morrison Tech. I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. I think you want to speak with Richard Morrison, our CEO. Margaret's laugh was crisp, professional. No mistake, Ms. Williams. I'm calling specifically for you. Mr. Harold Morrison would like to schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience. He's quite eager to discuss some developments regarding the company. My heart started racing. Harold Morrison had retired from active management 5 years ago, but he still held controlling interest in Morrison Tech through the family trust. What could he possibly want with me? Of course. When would be convenient? How about tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at our downtown offices? And Ms. Williams? Mr. Morrison asked me to tell you that he's been watching the company very closely lately. He's particularly interested in recent personnel decisions. After she hung up, I sat in my windowless office, staring at my phone. Harold Morrison wanted to see me. The day after his son had demoted me for being unpresentable. The day after Tiffany Summers had taken over my position with a smile that could cut glass. I opened my laptop and began typing my resignation letter, but something made me stop. Instead, I opened a new document and began writing something else entirely. A detailed report on Morrison Tech's operational efficiency over the past 12 years. Every cost-saving measure I'd implemented. Every process I'd streamlined. Every million-dollar mistake I'd prevented. But most importantly, every regulation violation I'd quietly fixed. Every ethical breach I'd covered up. Every time I'd protected Richard Morrison from his own incompetence. Because here's what Richard and his executive model didn't know. I hadn't just been the vice president of operations. I'd been their safety net, their cleanup crew, their get-out-of-jail-free card. And after 12 years of keeping their secrets, I had quite a collection. The next morning, I arrived at Chen & Associates 30 minutes early, wearing my best navy suit, the one that actually fit properly and made me feel confident despite what Richard Morrison thought about my appearance. The office was exactly what you'd expect from a firm that managed billion-dollar trusts. Marble floors, mahogany paneling, and the kind of understated luxury that whispered power. Margaret Chen was a petite woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper handshake. She led me into a conference room where Harold Morrison was waiting. At 73, Harold Morrison still commanded attention. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his suit impeccable, and his blue eyes, so different from his son's cold stare, held genuine warmth. Ms. Williams, he said, rising to shake my hand. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Please, sit down. I settled into the leather chair across from him, my heart pounding with anticipation and confusion. Harold leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. I'm going to be direct with you, Brittany. May I call you Brittany? I nodded. Good. Brittany, I built Morrison Tech from nothing. Started in my garage 42 years ago with a dream and a $5,000 loan. I've watched that company grow, evolve, and become something I'm proud to call my legacy. He paused, his expression darkening slightly. But lately I've been concerned about the direction Richard is taking the company. Some of his decisions have been questionable. My mouth went dry. Did he know about yesterday? I have sources within the company, Brittany. Good people who keep me informed about significant personnel changes. Imagine my surprise when I learned that the woman who increased operational efficiency by 37%, the woman who saved us over $15 million in the past 3 years alone, was suddenly deemed unsuitable for executive leadership. Heat flooded my cheeks. He knew. Harold Morrison knew exactly what his son had done. Sir, He held up a hand. Let me finish. I also learned about Ms. Summers' qualifications for her new role. Or should I say, her lack thereof. Margaret Chen slid a folder across the table. I opened it to find Tiffany's resume, and my jaw dropped. Associate's degree from a community college. 2 years of experience as a marketing coordinator at a small firm. No management experience. No technical background. No credentials that would justify a VP position at a major corporation. But that's not why I asked you here, Harold continued. I asked you here because I know what Richard doesn't know. What's that? Harold smiled. Not the cold, calculating smile of his son, but something warm and genuine. That you're my goddaughter. The world stopped. Everything went silent except for the sound of my own breathing. I'm sorry. What? Your father, David Williams, was my best friend and business partner when I started Morrison Tech. He invested his life savings in my crazy idea, worked 18-hour days to help me build something extraordinary. He was going to be my VP of operations when we went public. My father had died in a car accident when I was 7 years old. My mother rarely talked about his work, only that he'd been involved with technology companies. When David died, Harold continued, I promised your mother I'd always look out for you. I've been tracking your career since you graduated from Stanford. When you applied to Morrison Tech 12 years ago, I made sure Richard interviewed you. I've been watching your progress ever since. I felt like I was drowning. You've been watching me? Every promotion, every achievement, every brilliant solution you've developed for this company. I've watched Richard take credit for your work, watched him undervalue your contributions, watched him treat you like you were disposable. Margaret slid another document across the table. This one made my heart stop entirely. It was a stock certificate, in my name, for 12% of Morrison Tech's outstanding shares. Your father's original investment, Harold explained, plus growth over the past 30 years. I've been holding it in trust, waiting for the right moment to transfer it to you. 12%. I owned 12% of Morrison Tech. My net worth had just jumped from my savings account balance to approximately $50 million. But here's the thing, Brittany, Harold continued, his voice taking on a sharper edge. I own 38%. Combined with your 12%, we control 50% of the company. Exactly enough to outvote Richard and the board. The implications hit me like a freight train. Richard Morrison, the man who had humiliated me yesterday, who had called me unpresentable, who had replaced me with his affair partner, was about to discover that the woman he'd dismissed actually had the power to fire him. There's more, Margaret said, sliding a final document across the table. This is a consulting agreement we'd like you to sign. You'll serve as a special advisor to the Morrison Family Trust, focusing on operational oversight and corporate governance. The compensation is substantial. I looked at the figure on the contract and nearly fell out of my chair. It was more than triple my current salary at Morrison Tech. Of course, Harold added with a twinkle in his eye, this position would require you to attend all board meetings, starting with tomorrow's emergency session. Emergency session? Oh, yes, Harold smiled. I've called an emergency board meeting to discuss recent personnel decisions and their impact on company performance. Richard doesn't know about it yet, but he'll get the notification this afternoon. I sat there, processing the complete reversal of my situation. 24 hours ago, I'd been demoted for being too fat for executive leadership. Now I was discovering that I was actually one of the most powerful people in the company. What happens if I sign this? I asked. Harold's smile turned predatory, exactly like his son's, but directed at a very different target. Then we make some changes to Morrison Tech's leadership structure, starting with the immediate termination of employees who have violated company policies regarding discrimination and hostile work environments. My phone buzzed. A text message from my former assistant. OMG, Brittany. Tiffany just screamed at the entire operations team and called the Henderson report stupid busy work. and she deleted 3 client files by accident. Richard is in damage control mode. Where are you? I looked up at Harold Morrison, my newly discovered godfather, the man who had been protecting my career from the shadows for 12 years. Where do I sign? As I put my signature on the consulting agreement, I couldn't help but think about Richard Morrison, probably sitting in his corner office right now, feeling smugly satisfied about replacing the fat girl with his perfect little girlfriend. He had no idea that his perfect little girlfriend was about to single-handedly destroy everything he'd built on his father's legacy, and he definitely had no idea that the woman he'd dismissed as unpresentable now had the power to present him with his termination papers. The best part? I was going to do it in front of the entire executive team, just like he'd done to me. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't served cold. It's served with a side of poetic justice and a $50 million smile. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. the following day. I spent the morning in my new role as special advisor, reviewing financial reports and operational data with Margaret Chen. What I discovered made my blood run cold, and my resolve burn even hotter. In the 48 hours since Tiffany had taken over my position, Morrison Tech had lost 2 major clients, violated 3 regulatory compliance protocols, and somehow managed to delete an entire quarter's worth of operational data. The Henderson account, our biggest client worth $12 million annually, had already sent a formal letter of complaint about the unprofessional and incompetent handling of their quarterly review. But that wasn't the worst part. Margaret slid another folder across the mahogany conference table. "These are the emails Tiffany sent yesterday," she said grimly. "Before you read them, you should know that we have legal grounds for immediate termination and possibly criminal charges." The first email made my stomach drop. Tiffany had sent confidential client pricing information to Morrison Tech's biggest competitor, apparently thinking she was forwarding it to Richard. The second email contained detailed technical specifications for our proprietary software, sent to what she believed was an internal team, but was actually an external vendor. But the third email was pure gold. It was addressed to Richard, sent at 11:47 p.m. the previous night. "Baby, I can't believe we pulled it off. That fat cow is finally out of our way. I know you were worried about her finding out about the tax stuff and the harassment settlements, but she's stuck in that closet office now. No one will listen to her even if she tries to talk. Plus, I found her files about the EPA violations and the fake safety reports. I deleted everything just to be safe. We're home free. See you at your place tonight. Wear that thing I like." Margaret watched my face as I read. She thought she was being clever, deleting the evidence. What she didn't know is that everything is automatically backed up to our legal compliance servers. She essentially created a written confession of conspiracy, document destruction, and admission of multiple federal violations. My hands were trembling, not from fear this time, but from pure, righteous fury. Richard and Tiffany hadn't just discriminated against me, they'd been covering up serious crimes, using my reputation and discretion as their shield. "There's more," Margaret continued. "We also have security footage of Tiffany accessing your locked files after hours, and recorded phone calls where she discusses getting rid of the fat problem with Richard. She's been recording their conversations on her personal phone, apparently as insurance, not realizing she was creating evidence against both of them." At exactly 1:55 p.m., I walked into the Morrison Tech boardroom for the first time in my new role. The executive team was already assembled. 5 board members, the VP of Sales, the CFO, the head of legal, and several department directors. They looked puzzled and slightly annoyed at being called to an emergency meeting. Richard sat at the head of the table, his usual confident smirk in place. Tiffany perched beside him in a chair that had been hastily added, wearing a dress that was more appropriate for a nightclub than a boardroom. She kept checking her phone and fidgeting with her hair, clearly out of her depth. Harold Morrison entered at exactly 2 p.m., followed by Margaret Chen and 2 other attorneys I didn't recognize. The room fell silent. "Good afternoon, everyone," Harold said, taking his seat at the opposite end of the table from Richard. "Thank you for adjusting your schedules on short notice. I'd like to introduce our new special advisor to the Morrison Family Trust, Ms. Brittany Williams." I watched Richard's face go through a fascinating range of emotions, confusion, recognition, and then dawning horror as he realized I was sitting at the boardroom table he'd banned me from just 2 days earlier. "Dad," Richard started, "I don't understand why—" "You'll understand shortly," Harold cut him off. "Brittany, would you please present your findings?" I stood up, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Over the past 48 hours, I've conducted a comprehensive review of Morrison Tech's operational status following recent personnel changes. What I've discovered presents immediate legal, financial, and reputational risks to this company." I clicked to the first slide of my presentation. Let's start with client relations. The Henderson Group, representing $12 million in annual revenue, has formally terminated their contract due to what they call gross professional misconduct by our new VP of Operations. Tiffany's face went pale. Richard leaned forward, suddenly alert. The misconduct included arriving 2 hours late to their quarterly review meeting, addressing their CEO as honey, and when asked about their operational efficiency metrics, responding with, and I quote from their complaint letter, "That's like super complicated math stuff. Can't we just say everything is awesome?" Several board members exchanged horrified glances. The VP of Sales physically winced. "But client relations are the least of our concerns," I continued, clicking to the next slide. "More serious are the regulatory violations committed in the past 48 hours. Richard was now sitting ramrod straight, his confident demeanor cracking. Our new VP of Operations sent confidential client data to Morrison Tech's primary competitor, Dynacore Systems. She also transmitted proprietary technical specifications to an external vendor, believing them to be an internal team. Both actions constitute serious breaches of our non-disclosure agreements and potentially federal trade secret violations." That's impossible," Tiffany stammered. "I was just trying to help." "Help?" I turned to face her directly. "Is that what you call deleting an entire quarter's worth of operational data? Or sending this email?" I read aloud from Tiffany's confession email, watching her face turn from pale to green. By the time I got to the part about deleting evidence of EPA violations and fake safety reports, Richard looked like he was going to be sick. "These statements constitute admission of criminal conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and document destruction," Margaret Chen added smoothly. "Ms. Summers, you should know that you're currently under federal investigation for these actions." Tiffany turned to Richard with panic in her eyes. "You said everything would be fine. You said she was just some nobody who couldn't hurt us." The room was dead silent, except for the sound of Richard's career imploding in real time. Harold Morrison spoke for the first time since my presentation began. "Richard, I've been willing to overlook many of your questionable decisions over the years, but this combination of discrimination, criminal misconduct, and sheer incompetence cannot be tolerated." "Dad, please," Richard stood up, desperation creeping into his voice. "This is all a misunderstanding. Brittany is obviously bitter about her reassignment." "Reassignment?" Harold's voice turned ice cold. "You mean the illegal termination based on weight discrimination? The demotion of our most valuable operations executive to make room for your affair partner?" The word affair hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several board members were furiously taking notes. The head of legal was already on his phone, presumably with the company's crisis management team. "It wasn't about her weight," Richard protested weakly. "It was about executive presence. About what exactly?" I interrupted, my voice carrying 12 years of suppressed anger. "About the fact that I've been covering up your mistakes for over a decade? About the bribes you took from Dynacore? About the safety inspections you falsified? About the harassment settlements you've been hiding from the board?" I clicked to my final slide. A comprehensive list of every unethical, illegal, and incompetent decision Richard had made during his tenure as CEO. Every time I'd quietly fixed his mistakes. Every regulation we'd violated. Every employee who'd been mistreated and silenced. "This is everything," I announced. 12 years of criminal activity, covered up by the woman you deemed unpresentable for executive leadership. The woman whose discretion and loyalty protected you from federal prison. Richard was now visibly sweating. "Brittany, please. We can work this out. I'll reinstate you, give you a raise. You'll give me nothing," I replied calmly. Because you no longer have the authority to give anyone anything. Harold Morrison stood up. By the power vested in me as controlling shareholder of Morrison Tech, I hereby call for an immediate vote of no confidence in Richard Morrison as Chief Executive Officer. All in favor? Margaret Chen asked formally. Every hand in the room went up, except Richard's and Tiffany's. The motion passes unanimously, Harold announced. Richard Morrison, you are hereby terminated from Morrison Technologies, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building within the hour. Richard's face went through shock, denial, and finally, desperate rage. You can't do this. I'm your son. This company is my birthright. Your birthright was earned by better men than you, Harold replied coldly. Men like David Williams, who died believing that integrity and hard work were the foundations of success. His daughter has just demonstrated those values. You've demonstrated why you were never worthy of them. Tiffany, meanwhile, had started crying. Ugly, mascara-streaked tears that made her look nothing like the polished seductress who'd stolen my office 2 days earlier. What about me? She whimpered. What happens to me? Margaret Chen answered with clinical precision. Ms. Summers, you're terminated for gross misconduct, effective immediately. You'll also be receiving a federal indictment for corporate espionage and obstruction of justice within the next 72 hours. I'd suggest you contact a criminal defense attorney. As security arrived to escort Richard and Tiffany from the building, Harold Morrison turned to address the remaining board members. I'd like to propose Brittany Williams as interim chief executive officer, pending a formal search process. Her qualifications speak for themselves, and her intimate knowledge of this company's operations makes her uniquely qualified to clean up the mess we're inheriting. The vote was unanimous. An hour later, I was sitting in Richard's former office, my office now, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city skyline. My nameplate had already been changed. My belongings had been moved from the closet back to the corner office where they belonged. Harold knocked on my doorframe. How are you feeling? I turned to face him, this man who'd been my guardian angel for 12 years without my knowledge. Honestly, terrified. I never wanted to be CEO. I just wanted to do good work and be respected for it. The best leaders are the ones who don't seek power for its own sake, he replied, settling into one of my chairs. David would be proud of you. Not just for today, but for who you've become despite everything they put you through. My phone buzzed with a text from my former assistant. OMG, Brittany, did you see the news? Richard and Tiffany got arrested in the parking lot. Everyone is talking about you being the new CEO. The whole office is celebrating. I looked at Harold and smiled, the first genuine smile I'd had in years. So, what happens now? I asked. Now you show this company what real leadership looks like. You hire people based on merit instead of cup size. You build a culture where talent is valued over appearance. You make Morrison Tech the kind of company your father envisioned when he invested his life savings in a crazy dream. 6 months later, I was featured on the cover of Forbes magazine. The headline read, The Revenge CEO, How Brittany Williams Transformed Corporate Culture and Tripled Profits in 180 Days. The article detailed how Morrison Tech had become the most inclusive and profitable company in our sector, how we'd implemented revolutionary diversity programs, ethical leadership training, and performance-based promotion systems, how employee satisfaction had reached record highs while turnover plummeted. But my favorite part was the sidebar story about Richard Morrison, who was now selling used cars at a dealership in Phoenix while awaiting trial for fraud and tax evasion. According to the reporter who tracked him down, he'd gained 40 pounds and was living in a studio apartment with a roommate named Gary. As for Tiffany, she'd pled guilty to corporate espionage and received 3 years in federal prison. Her last Instagram post, before her accounts were suspended, was a tearful video apologizing to everyone she'd hurt and promising to learn from her mistakes. I kept that Forbes magazine on my desk as a reminder, not of my revenge, but of what's possible when you refuse to let other people's prejudices define your worth. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. Sometimes, it's becoming everything they said you could never be. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's proving that the woman they called unpresentable was exactly what their company needed to succeed. The woman they tried to hide in a closet became the leader who opened all the doors. And that, I've learned, is a much sweeter victory than any revenge could ever be.